thought coming home from deployment would feel like closure. I imagined the familiar creak of my porch step, the squeak of the front door, maybe even the smell of old pine cleaner from the cabinet my wife never really liked. Instead, I came back to jazz music, wind chimes, and a protein smoothie guy named Zack in my kitchen. If you've ever trusted your community only to have them rent your life to strangers, hit that like button and tell me your story in the comments. Because what happened to me, you won't believe. It was legal. Let me back up. I didn't even make it to the porch before I knew something was off. The lawn was cut, not just trimmed, manicured, hedges sculpted, sidewalk pressure washed. A new welcome mat that chirped, live, laugh, love. Cute? Except we never laughed at anything. HOA. My old mat, come back with a warrant. I stopped walking. The mat wasn't the problem. The vibe was. This place looked staged, like a real estate photo shoot, mid-snap. And then I saw it. A red Tesla. It wasn't parked, planted, like it belonged, like the driver paid HOA fees early and reminded the board on Facebook. And I knew, with a soldier's instinct, that I wasn't welcome in my own damn driveway. Then came the wind chimes. My wife hated wind chimes. That's when my stomach dropped. Not from fear, but from familiarity. Like your toothbrush moved a millimeter. Only this time, it was my whole house. I stepped up to the porch, reached for the bell. Through the side window, I spotted movement. Barefoot, tank top, holding what looked like a protein shake in one of those eco-glass tumblers influencers post on Instagram between yoga selfies and grind set quotes. The door opened before I knocked. Can I help you? Zack. A 32, flip-flops, aviators on his head, and a grin that said, I own 3 NFTs and a hydro flask. This is my house, I said flatly. Zack cocked his head like a golden retriever hearing jazz for the first time. I don't think so, man. I pulled out my key, the same key I carried through 2 continents, 7 airports, and 1 roadside IED that almost ended my deployment early. I slipped it into the lock. It didn't turn. Zack stepped back. If you're looking for the leasing office, try the HOA. We signed everything through them. That's when the black SUV rolled up. Community safety enforcement. 2 guys in polos and tactical vests that had seen more pizza sauce than battlefield action. Sir, one said, fake authority dripping from every syllable. We need you to step away from the residence. This is my house. The tenants have a signed lease. You're trespassing. And that's when she appeared. Your clipboard, beige visor, sunglasses that reflected guilt and deflected responsibility. Oh, she said, all smiles and spreadsheets. You're early. Your wife's message said Q4. Isn't scheduled, Karen. I was deployed. She didn't blink. And we thank you for your service. But under bylaw 14C, homes unoccupied for over 90 days without documented maintenance or contact are subject to board reassignment. You mean you rented out my house? To ensure the property remained in circulation, she said, nodding toward Smoothie Zack behind my doorframe. I asked one question. Did you get my deployment waiver? Karen twitched, a microsecond flicker of, oh crap, before she smiled again. Must have been a clerical error. Right, a clerical error that ended with a stranger sipping collagen blend in my kitchen, while my wife and kids stayed in a motel. You'll have a chance to contest the board's actions at the next monthly meeting. I was serving this country while you changed my locks. We followed procedure. No, Karen, you didn't follow procedure. You followed power. I stared past them into the house. My wife's framed deployment photo still hung near the kitchen. They hadn't even bothered to take it down. Zack raised his smoothie, and waved. My key dug into my palm. I wanted to snap it. Instead, I turned, walked to my rental car, and sat there. Quiet. Not broken. Calculating. I scrolled through my phone until I found the number I hadn't used since the last time someone tried to take something from me they didn't earn. I sent one word. Ready? The response came in 2 seconds, always. Wasn't calling for help. I was calling for backup. The motel smelled like wet carpet and disappointment. You know the kind. Stale coffee in the lobby, cigarette burns on the comforter, and that faint chemical tang that no amount of air freshener can disguise. It wasn't a home. It was a holding pattern. My boots were still lined up by the door like I was waiting for another mission brief, because I was. Only this time the battlefield was my own neighborhood, and the enemy wore visors and HOA badges. My wife was calm. Too calm. The kind that comes after too many punches in a row. She handed me coffee without a word. The kids were still asleep. I hope they stayed that way. Our son hadn't said more than 3 words since we got removed. He wore his hoodie-like armor now, pulled tight, eyes shadowed. His room, the one with the solar system mural we painted together, was now occupied by a golden retriever and a startup bro who drank beetroot lattes. I opened my laptop, pages of HOA bylaws, zoning codes, archived board meeting notes, all of it flying by as I searched for the weapon they used to gut my home. That's when I found it. Bylaw 14C, Section 3. Properties deemed non-competitive to visual or environmental health standards for over 90 days may be reassigned to provisional board control, pending occupancy. Translation: if your grass is too tall and you're not there to defend it, they take your house. What the real kicker? The bylaw was backdated. It didn't exist when I deployed. It was filed 3 weeks after I left, during an emergency proxy quorum. No notice, no neighborhood vote, no transparency. And guess who signed it? Sean. I scrolled through the meeting minutes and found a handwritten note in the margin. This should help with a Spruce Lane issue. Spruce Lane, that was my street. That was me. I wasn't a neighbor to her. I was an issue. I shut the laptop, heart pounding. Walked outside for air. Didn't help. And then I saw him. One of the community enforcement goons from the other day. The younger one. Standing by a pickup, laughing on the phone. I crept closer. He didn't see me. Yeah, the guy freaked out. I thought he was going to go full Rambo. Now Karen handled it. Said he checked out of the neighborhood long before he ever left. He laughed. I didn't. I stepped out from behind a car, quiet as a breeze. He jumped when he saw me. You stalking us now? He asked, suddenly less amused. I walked close, too close for comfort. Watched the sweat bead on his collar. You tell Karen, I said evenly, if she's going to quote me, she should try doing it to my face. He opened his mouth to respond, but I was already walking away. That night, my son asked, is it still our house? We were in the car, just past the street, didn't stop. He'd pressed his face to the window. His room was painted over, posters gone. His telescope, replaced with a dog bed. I didn't answer. I couldn't lie. Back at the motel, I stared at the screen again. I've had insurgents lie to my face, I told my wife. Had generals give me bad intel. But I never thought a woman with a clipboard and a newsletter would hit harder than all of them. She sat next to me. What do we do? We build the file, track every vote, every signature, every dollar. She nodded. Then what? Then, I said, eyes burning, we take back what's ours. Next morning, I walked into the HOA office like I was there to sign a lease. GoPro clipped to my shirt. Smile polite. Karen was chatting with a realtor. I didn't speak, just walked over to the community bulletin board. There it was, Bylaw 14C, printed, signed, stamped. I snapped a photo. Then I leaned in and whispered, "You should be careful who you write laws for." Karen's smile twitched. Before she could respond, Mrs. Delaney walked in. The widow from the corner lot. The kind of old-school neighbor who remembers birthdays and brings muffins when your dog gets sick. She looked straight at Karen. "You did get his deployment notice, didn't you?" Karen's face froze. "You told me you had it on file," Mrs. Delaney added, voice rising. "I asked you. You said he wasn't coming back soon enough to matter." Karen didn't speak. She didn't have to, because that one sentence turned a civil dispute into a court case. I walked out without another word. But inside, I knew the real war had just started. There's a kind of silence in a motel room that wraps around you like wet wool. Heavy, itchy, impossible to ignore. It's not peaceful. It hums, like the room itself is holding its breath, waiting for your next move. That night, I sat in my uniform pants and a wrinkled t-shirt that still smelled like aircraft fuel. One boot on, one off. The laptop hummed in front of me, glowing with the HOA charter like some kind of cursed relic. Then the email came. Cease and desist unauthorized surveillance. Because of the GoPro. They were trying to bait me, to push me into making the wrong move so they could twist it into something criminal. I didn't bite. I dug deeper. And then I made the call. The thread we hadn't touched in years lit up. The old crew. My people. Muster at 1800. Staging behind Shell Station. One reply. Then another. And another. Copy, copy, copy. By sundown, we weren't just a bunch of veterans catching up. We were an operation. They arrived like they never left. Quiet handshakes, nods, no cheers, no speeches. Just purpose. Ramos showed up first, built like a vending machine with a beard, still spoke like a drill sergeant crossed with a bouncer. "Where's the problem?" he asked. "You're standing on it," I said. We moved to the war room, an old vape shop I'd rented under an LLC, 3 blocks from the HOA office. Yates unrolled the neighborhood map. Bowen set up a secure router. Davis unpacked a duffel bag so heavy it made TSA cry. "You brought the noise?" I asked. "Always," he replied. But this wasn't about firepower. This was about justice. I dropped the map marker on the grid. Primary objective, my house. Secondary, HOA office, but leave that untouched unless absolutely necessary. "Think she's hiding something?" Ramos asked. "Definitely," I said, "but the priority is presence, proof, control the narrative." Yates tapped the map. "She's got cams, front porch, back fence, all cloud-based." "I can reroute," Bowen added, "but we'll lose real-time feedback." "Don't need real-time," I said. "I need her off balance." Then Reed walked in. I hadn't seen him since the tribunal. We didn't part on good terms. He dropped a go bag, stared me down. "Before we start," he said, "you need to answer one question." "Ask. This isn't just revenge, right?" "No." "You sure?" I didn't blink. "It's a homecoming." That was enough, he nodded. We broke into pairs. Davis and Ramos, decoy and containment. Bowen and Yates, digital infiltration. Reed and I, point entry and narrative control. We'd show up like neighbors, civilian clothes, hidden cams, mics, recorded handoffs. Every step legal, every word a blade. Before we broke, I looked them all in the eye. "Erin thinks this is a game," I said. "She thinks you're here to scare her." I held up my uniform, folded in a flag from deployment. "She's wrong. You hear? to remind her that some people still protect what's theirs. They nodded, silent, focused, furious. 600 hours. Operation Homecoming. The sun hadn't cracked the sky when we moved. No weapons, just gear, just truth. We were halfway down the block when the first squad car pulled up. Slow, intentional, like a lion circling prey. Then the second car, unmarked, dark tint, local sheriff's department. Positions, I said. The team split, not to fight, to witness. Sheriff Blaine stepped out, clipboard, aviators, calm in a way that felt too calculated. His deputy, Nunez, looked younger, hand twitching near his belt, nervous or ready, maybe both. "Gentlemen," Blaine said, "you want to tell me why 6 military-aged males are coordinating outside a residential property at dawn?" Raise my hands, no aggression, just calm. We're reclaiming property, legally. Karen's SUV pulled up behind him like a parade float. She got out like she was stepping onto a stage. Neutral beige. Manicured hands. Thermos in one hand, like it was a champagne flute. "You're trespassing," she said. "This is harassment." I didn't look at her. I looked at Blaine. "You've seen the deed." "I've seen what you filed," he said. "Emergency property control transfer under HOA abandonment clause." "It's fake." "Not my call," he said, nodding at Nunez. That's when the rookie moved for his cuffs. Davis stepped in, calm but firm. "Sir, any physical contact without arrest will be interpreted as excessive force. This is all recorded under civil code." Nunez froze. Blaine raised a brow. "Back off, deputy." Heron smiled. "Too wide, too sure." "You're not in uniform anymore," she hissed. "You're just angry men trespassing." I stepped forward, close enough to smell her perfume. "You really filed an abandonment clause?" I whispered. "After forging my deployment timestamp?" She flinched, just a hair, then smiled again. "Prove it." I tapped my earpiece. I wouldn't know. Footage streamed instantly to a private YouTube link. HOA meeting. Karen's voice, clear as glass. "He's not coming back. And if he does, we'll make it so it's not his home anymore." Benil's jaw tightened. I handed him the flash drive. Meeting minutes, property records, all altered. Check the IP logs. They route to her house. Karen laughed, but her hand was trembling. Then my phone buzzed. No number. "You're about to be served," a woman's voice said. Calm, cold. "By who?" I asked. No answer. Just a click. I turned around. Karen was on her phone, smiling, but it wasn't for show. Because I realized something in that moment. Karen wasn't the final boss. She was just the distraction. That night, I sat in the motel with the laptop open, the video from Karen's HOA meeting looping like a ghost that wouldn't stop whispering. But it wasn't Karen's voice I was focused on. It was the man standing behind her. Black suit, gray hair, old military posture he couldn't quite shake. Redford, retired CO. Used to lecture us on honor. Now standing next to Karen, like a mentor, beaming over his best student. I zoomed in. His lips moved, whispering something, off mic. Probably about which house to reclassify next. This wasn't just Karen's HOA scam anymore. This was a network. My wife sat across from me, legs crossed, yellow legal pad in her lap. "That's the guy from Fort Jackson, right?" "Yeah," I said. "Redford, he signed off on my deployment orders." She didn't blink. "Then we use him." Bowen traced IP logs from the HOA charter edits. The digital signature, Redford compliance admin. He hadn't even tried to hide it. That's how arrogant he was. 3:00 a.m. I paced the motel parking lot like it was a combat perimeter. On my notepad, a list of names. Zoning director, up for re-election. HOA, treasurer, bankrupt, sheriff, under review for excessive force. They weren't bulletproof, just unchallenged. The next day, we went dark, phones off, comms silent except Bowen. He stayed behind building the kill packet. HOA charter logs. Rental income tied to Karen's LLC. Big tenant notices. Redford's admin credentials. Testimonies from 2 other military homeowners. We uploaded everything to a secure cloud. Then I mailed certified hard copies to the district court, the state housing board, and 1 personal JAG contact. Each envelope bore the same line. The house was stolen while a soldier served his country. How many others? Then we sent one to Karen's house, signature required. We watched her receive it from the sidewalk across the street. She opened it, skimmed 3 pages, then dropped it, like it burned her fingers. She bolted inside, door wide open behind her. The next morning, Ramos got pulled over, twice. No tickets, just suspicious vehicle reports. That afternoon, he got served with a restraining order. Karen claimed he threatened her. We had footage. He never said a word to her. Didn't matter. Karen was bleeding us with legal paper cuts. She's trying to isolate you, my wife said. Divide the team. Make it look like you're the threat. He doesn't know us, I replied. She doesn't know me, she corrected. 2 days later, we got a tip from an anonymous number. Check, City Planning Board agenda, page 3. We did. Hidden in the back, under miscellaneous proposals, was a zoning shift initiated by Karen's LLC. Marked urgent. Intended to convert abandoned residential properties into short-term rental zones. My house was highlighted in red. The buyer? A holding company connected to Redford. That's when it all clicked. This wasn't a property dispute. This was organized real estate fraud. We weren't fighting Karen anymore. We were fighting a syndicate built on exploiting soldiers who couldn't fight back. We called it what it was, the takeover. And we were going public. The video we posted that night, footage of Karen's arrest, blurred out tenant testimonies, redacted legal documents, a voiceover from my wife, calm and steady. This is how they stole our house, and yours could be next. Within 24 hours, it hit 1 million views. The comment section exploded. My dad's house was taken while he was in hospice. He used his claws on my cousin. He was stationed in Okinawa. Karen is every HOA nightmare come true. The next morning, Monroe, the HOA treasurer, locked down his house. Too late. The subpoenas went out. We watched the officers arrive from the truck, quiet as shadows. Monroe opened the door without even asking who it was. He knew. You've been stealing homes. I said, you abandoned them, he replied flatly. I stepped forward. We defended them. You looted them. He smiled. You'll never win. Poaches are legal fortresses. And I guess it's time for siege tactics. They cuffed him. No resistance, just a muttered line. You can't fix stupid patriotism. Ramos almost swung. I stopped him. He's not worth it. Back at my house, the real one, I opened the mailbox and found it. No return address, just one envelope. Inside, a formal city complaint. Unauthorized tactical training. Civil Code violation 43A, filed 2 days earlier. Signed by Karen L. Prescott, from jail. She wasn't done. She had launched one final strike, and this one wasn't about turf. It was about destroying me completely. If this complaint held up, the city could condemn my home, which meant court, suspension of residence rights, and possibly a dishonorable discharge for community endangerment. All from one lie. From a jail cell. I stared at the form, my pulse a metronome of fury. She wasn't just playing the long game. She was finishing it. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was scared, but because I was calculating. Karen had filed a city complaint from a jail cell, knowing full well what it could trigger, a chain reaction. If the inspection went poorly, the city could re-tag the house. If that happened, I'd be barred from living there. And if that happened, the army could brand me a liability. I wasn't just at risk of losing my house, I was at risk of losing everything. So I did what soldiers do when under fire. I built a counter-offensive. Step 1, gather evidence. I pulled every file I had. Video footage of our backyard drills with Max, the rescue dog. Paperwork from veteran charities who endorsed our community training. Signed waivers from neighbors. HOA newsletters where Karen herself praised our service dog initiative. Words in print. Then I called in one more favor. A former JAG officer turned prosecutor. Quiet guy. The kind of man who looked like he managed a hardware store but buried legal enemies for fun. I need this buried, I said. You mean handled? No, I said. I mean legally buried. So deep not even Karen's ghost can dig it up. He didn't ask questions, just said text me the address. The inspection came 2 days later. Middle-aged guy, clipboard, sunglasses, awkward tan lines. Looked like someone's uncle who coached Little League. Just need to take a look around, he said. Of course, I replied, smiling like my mortgage didn't depend on the outcome. We walked him through the backyard. Quiet, professional. Max performed commands flawlessly. No barking, no charging, no chaos. You run this like a training facility, the inspector said. I nodded. We are a training facility. For veterans. For families who don't want to break when they come home. He didn't say another word, just scribbled something on his clipboard. 3 hours later, we got the ruling. Complaint dismissed. The city called the submission incomplete, unverified, and retaliatory. They flagged Karen's name and launched a fraud inquiry. And just like that, Karen's last grenade turned into a boomerang. But the real hit came next. An email from the County Housing Board. Subject: HOA Asset Redistribution Review. Inside, proof Karen had used HOA funds to pay her legal team, personal legal defense, paid for by community fees. Now the board wanted reimbursement, not from the HOA, from her. They came for her house, her car, her bank account. And just like that, Karen cracked. Her lawyer filed a motion to withdraw. She stood alone in court, hair unwashed, voice hoarse, ranting about conspiracies. They didn't meet her. Some enemies fall loud, others fall inward. She fell like a domino in a house of mirrors. Guilty. 8 years, civil restitution pending. The HOA dissolved. Every homeowner in the community received a payout, especially those affected by Karen's actions. My wife and I, we used the check to rebuild. So we put back up the old welcome mat. Come back with a warrant. The porch light flickered. The grass grew wild again. Max sprawled in the sun, belly up, tail twitching, like he finally understood what peace felt like. Ramos went back to school. Bowen picked up a contractor gig overseas. The house was quiet for the first time in years. No drills, no shouts, just silence, the good kind. Then the doorbell rang. Mrs. Delaney stood on the porch, cane in one hand, Tupperware in the other. "Rot cookies," she said. "Also, found this in my mailbox. Think it's yours." She handed me a small white envelope. "No return address." Inside, a handwritten note. "You didn't win. You just got lucky." Taped to the back, a rusted key, labeled in faded Sharpie. Unit 13. We don't have a Unit 13. Not in the subdivision, not in any HOA file, not on the blueprints. What the hell was Karen trying to tell me? A warning? A bluff? That night, I didn't talk to Ramos. Didn't wake Bowen. Didn't even mention it to my wife, because I knew exactly what it was. The war wasn't over. Not yet. I dug into the old HOA archives and found it buried in a 14-year-old plan, a storm shelter beneath a raised model home. Decommissioned, forgotten. Signed off for closure by, you guessed it, Karen Prescott. We pried open the hatch 2 days later. Inside, 4 crates. A rusted filing cabinet. 1 shoebox labeled, "Board assets, do not destroy." Inside the box, financial ledgers, porridge violation notices, surveillance logs, personal account transfers, photos of illegal tenants, dozens of printed emails. One stood out. "Karen, 2 weeks before I returned. I don't care if he's active duty. He left. That makes him fair game." I boxed everything. Drove to the state attorney's office. Walked straight to the desk. "It's time," I said. 2 days later, Karen was arrested again. House arrest hadn't stopped her from conspiring. This time, she went down in handcuffs in front of 3 news vans. She tried to smile again. She always smiled, but this time it faded when she saw me across the street. I didn't wave. I didn't flinch. I just watched. Court moved fast. She tried to represent herself. Bad move. The state shredded her. 4 more victims came forward. Here are 4 more soldiers. She didn't just steal homes. She built an empire on exploiting people who couldn't fight back. By this time, she'd picked the wrong one. Sentencing, guilty. All counts, 8 years. Her assets seized. The HOA permanently disbanded. That evening, I sat on my porch. Max wagged his tail. My wife handed me coffee, and for once, nothing hurt. Mrs. Delaney returned, brought another envelope. Inside, a handwritten note. "Thank you for showing us. We don't have to be afraid of them anymore." That's when it hit me. We didn't just win. We changed the rules.